The Shadow Man's Curse, A Tale of the Haunted Cabin. 1. The cabin in the woodsy wasn't looking for trouble when I decided to spend a weekend at the cabin. It belonged to my late grandfather, an old, rickety place tucked deep in the Appalachian woods. My family had avoided it for years. They said it was cursed, that bad things happened there, but I didn't believe in that nonsense. I needed a quiet place to finish my novel. And the cabin seemed perfect. The first night was uneventful. Creaks and groans of the old structure were unsettling, but nothing out of the ordinary. I set up my laptop at the wooden desk by the window and tried to write. But my mind kept wandering to the strange marks etched into the wall, symbols and patterns that looked ancient. I told myself they were just decorations, perhaps left by my grandfather. That night, I fell asleep to the sound of the wind howling through the trees. 2. The stranger at the door. Second day. Things started to feel off. I found footprints in the dirt outside the cabin. They were large, too large for a human, and they circled the building. I chalked it up to my imagination. Maybe it was a bear. Then, just as the sun was setting, there was a knock at the door. I froze. Who could possibly be out here? Reluctantly, I opened it to find a man standing on the porch. He was tall and weary, his face pale and gaunt. His clothes were ragged, and his eyes had a haunted look. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. Before I could respond, he turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing into the shadows. I locked the door and bolted the windows, my heart racing. That night, I barely slept, convinced I'd hear that knock again. 3. The symbols awakened. Third day was worse. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow faintly, especially in the dim light of the cabin. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The forest outside felt alive, the trees looming closer, their branches clawing at the windows like skeletal fingers. I tried to distract myself by writing, but the words that came out were dark and disturbing, not at all what I intended to write. It was as if someone else were guiding my hands. The laptop screen flickered, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a face reflected in it, a twisted, hollow-eyed face staring back at me. That night, I woke to the sound of whispering. It was faint, almost like the wind, but the words were unmistakable. "Leave before it's too late." 4. The forest's secret. Next morning, I decided I couldn't stay any longer. I packed my things and headed for my car, but the forest seemed different. The path I had taken to get here was gone, replaced by a dense thicket of trees. It was as if the forest itself was trying to trap me. I wandered for hours, trying to find the road, but every direction led me back to the cabin. Exhausted and terrified, I returned to the porch, only to find a small wooden box sitting there. I hadn't seen it before. Inside was a piece of paper with the same symbols that were on the walls and a single sentence written in blood-red ink: "You can't leave now." 5. The Shadow Man. That night, I saw him for the first time. The Shadow Man. He stood at the edge of the forest, just beyond the tree line, watching me. He was tall and impossibly thin, his limbs unnaturally long. His face was obscured, but I could feel his eyes boring into me. Every time I looked away, he seemed to move closer. By the time I locked the door, he was standing at the porch, his bony hand reaching for the handle. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and backed into the corner, trembling. The knocking started again, slow and deliberate, each knock echoing through the cabin. I screamed for him to go away, but the knocking continued until dawn. When I finally dared to open the door, he was gone, but the porch was covered in deep claw marks. 6. The Bosamenti. Found the basement door the next day. It had been hidden behind an old bookcase. I don't know why I opened it. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe the cabin wanted me to. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness. The air was damp and smelled of rot. At the bottom, I found an altar made of stone, surrounded by more of those strange symbols. Candles burned in a circle, their flames casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the center of the altar was a book, its cover made of what looked like leather but felt wrong to the touch. I opened it to find pages filled with incomprehensible text and drawings of monstrous and human creatures. The last page had a single word written in English: "Run." 7. The final night. That night, the cabin came alive. The walls groaned, floorboards shook, and the symbols glowed brighter than ever. The whispering returned, louder this time, joined by guttural growls and distant screams. The Shadow Man was inside now. I could hear his footsteps, slow and deliberate, as he moved through the cabin. I hid in the bedroom, clutching the knife, but I knew it wouldn't save me. The door burst open, and he was there, his form towering over me. His hand reached out, and as it touched my shoulder, everything went black. 8. The aftermath. He woke up in my car, parked on the side of the road. The cabin was gone, replaced by an empty clearing. My belongings were in the back seat, and the wooden box sat on the passenger seat, its lid slightly ajar. Inside was the book, the one from the basement. I tried to throw it away, but it always found its way back to me. The symbols still haunt my dreams, and I can feel the Shadow Man watching, waiting for the day I'll return to the cabin. If you're reading this, don't make the same mistake I did. Stay away from the woods. Some places are meant to be forgotten. 9. The forgotten once. Weeks passed, but the nightmares didn't stop. Each night, I dreamed of the cabin, of the symbols, of the Shadow Man and something else, other figures, trapped in the darkness, reaching out for help. They were gaunt and pale, their faces frozen in eternal terror. I could feel their desperation, their hopelessness. One night, I woke to find the book open on my desk, even though I had locked it away. A new page had appeared, showing a map with an X marked in the center. It wasn't the cabin, but somewhere nearby. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. The location was deep in the forest, surrounded by twisted, ancient trees. At the center was a stone well, its edges carved with the same symbols from the cabin. As I peered inside, I heard whispers rising from the depths. Before I could react, something cold and wet grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the darkness. I barely escaped, but I knew I had awakened something far worse. 10. The keeper of the wealth. Next day, the Shadow Man wasn't alone. Another figure stood beside him at the edge of the forest, a woman with hollow eyes and a mouth stitched shut. She wore a tattered white dress, her bony fingers pointing toward me. The whispers grew louder each night, and now they carried words I could understand. Bring it back. I realized they wanted the book, but when I tried to burn it, the flames refused to touch it. When I tried to bury it, the ground spit it back out. The only way to end this was to return to the well, to face whatever lurked in its depths. 11. The descent. Armed with a flashlight and the knife, I returned to the well. The forest was deathly silent, as if holding its breath. The Shadow Man and the woman watched from a distance, their presence a constant reminder of my impending doom. Climbing into the well was the hardest thing I've ever done. The air grew colder the deeper I went, the walls slick with some unidentifiable slime. At the bottom, I found a cavern filled with more of those cursed symbols. In the center was a pedestal, and on it rested a black, pulsating orb. As I approached, the whispers became deafening, and the orb began to crack. Shadows poured out, taking shape as grotesque, nightmarish creatures. I placed the book on the pedestal, hoping it would stop them, but instead, the creatures turned their eyes to me. 12. The price of freedom. You don't remember how I escaped. One moment, I was surrounded by darkness, and the next, I was lying in a hospital bed. They told me hikers had found me unconscious near the edge of the forest, my clothes torn and covered in blood. The book was gone, but I know it's not over. The symbols still appear in random places on my walls and my dreams, even on my skin. The Shadow Man and the woman are still watching, waiting. If you ever find a book like that, don't open it. Don't even touch it. Some knowledge is meant to stay buried, and some doors should never be unlocked. 13. The returnee thought I had escaped for good, but one morning, the whispers returned louder, insistent. They told me the forest had not forgotten me. A mark appeared on my hand, the same symbols from the cabin, glowing faintly in the dark. I knew the forest was calling me back. Desperation drove me to research the origins of the cabin and the book. What I found was horrifying. My grandfather wasn't just an innocent man living in the woods, he had been a keeper. Someone who bound the shadows to the forest. His death left the balance broken, and the forest needed someone to take his place. 14. The final ritual. Forest no longer waited for me to come willingly. One night, I woke to find myself standing in the woods, barefoot and shivering. The Shadow Man stood before me, his form more defined, his presence more commanding. Behind him, the woman with the stitched mouth carried the book. "Take it," she whispered, her stitches parting unnaturally. "It's your turn now." I had no choice. The forest demanded a keeper, and I knew I couldn't escape it. I took the book, and the shadows surged forward, consuming me. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness. 15. The new keeper. I am the keeper now. The cabin has returned, but it is no longer a refuge, it is a prison. The shadows obey me, but I feel them pulling at the edges of my mind, threatening to consume what little humanity I have left. If you find this story, heed my warning. Stay away from the forest. The shadows are always watching, waiting for another soul to claim. And if you hear whispers calling your name, don't answer. Some places are meant to be forgotten, but they never forget you. 16. The last whisper. Years have passed, or perhaps only days. Time bends strangely in the cabin. The cymbals now pulse in rhythm with my own heartbeat, a constant reminder of my bond to this cursed place. I have seen the shadows claim others who wander too close. They are drawn to the whispers, as I once was. But the forest grows restless. I feel it shifting, preparing for something greater. The shadows whisper of a new keeper. Someone stronger, someone who will finally unleash what lies trapped in the well. My time is running out. Soon, I will become one with the forest, just another shadow among many. If you find this tale, know this: you are already part of the story. The shadows are coming for you. Listen closely, and you may hear their whispers in the wind. Will you be the next to answer their call? Some stories end, but this one never will.